This is Christopher John Björkness. It is January 13th, 2025. I'm afraid my voice is a little hoarse. I just got done with an interview with Richard Willett of Iconic on this very subject. I've done a couple videos recently about Kabbalah of Trump's crazy quest and Kabbalists, Freemasons, and the portal to hell, about Trump's plans to have an Anschluss with Canada and to annex Greenland. And I've been proving there's centuries of history behind this. There's absolutely nothing new about it. We learned about this plan, people of my generation, back in the 90s when they started talking about NAFTA and the North American Union. But as I've been proving, this is thousands of years old, this plan to take over the Arctic, because the Kabbalists believe that the North is the source of evil, that it is the Garden of Eden, and in the north of the Garden of Eden is planted the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which was planted by Samael, Satan, the devil. So they want to take over the Arctic and build gulags in the American Siberia and place all people of European descent that are still alive up there to punish them in the purgatory of the North. And these northern people, these Hyperboreans, these Tula members of the Tula Gesellschaft, are going to be stuck up there, and they're going to try to get us up there by offering us high-paying jobs to build a great deal of infrastructure that will ultimately become the Garden of Eden of the Kabbalists. And they view the Freemasons as their craftsmen. The ones who are going to rebuild Solomon's Temple have been pushing for us to take over the Arctic. And it is incredible. All the people I have found who have been involved in the exploration of the Arctic in modern times have been Freemasons, and this is not coincidental. Now, you should know that Freemasons believe they are descended from Cain, and that Cain is supposedly the child of Satan, Samael, the serpent in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Eve. They supposedly fornicated in the Garden of Eden and produced the child Cain, whose soul was reincarnated into Esau and became the soul of all the Gentiles. This is the serpent seed line theory of Kabbalah in the dual seed line theory. And Jacob, the people of the Kabbalists, supposedly descend from the next generation that was born of Adam and Eve and have the soul of God. So Gentiles are kind of a mixture of the soul of Satan and the female soul of God. And Freemasons specifically believe that they have this intellect from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that it is what they call the Lucifer spirit, and that they are very intelligent, very creative, and can accomplish things like exploring the Arctic, conquering the Arctic, and creating a Garden of Eden in the Arctic for the Kabbalists to live in. They have this dual concept that there's also a priesthood descended from Jacob, and that priesthood is the Kabbalists. So they have to build the temple for the Kabbalists, and they play their role in this dual system, and they impose their will on the world. They think they have the right to do that, and they serve the Kabbalist and the Kabbalistic agenda. And all this is spelled out in a book called Freemasonry and Catholicism by Max Heindel, and I'm going to show that to you. Albert Pike touched on it in his Morals and Dogma, that they worship Lucifer, but it's much more clearly and elaborately spelled out in Heindel. And this dual role of the Freemasons and the Kabbalists as the craftsmen, and the priests unto the nations. So it's, as I say, it's amazing how many Freemasons have been involved in all this. And if you want to see the history of the Kabbalists, I suggest you watch my video, Kabbalah of Trump's Crazy Quest, which you can find on my social media video channels, which are posted up on CJBBooks.com at the bottom of the page. You'll find my social media, my YouTube, Odysee, BitChute, Rumble, and Twitter feeds where you can find those videos. But today I'm going to focus in on these Freemasons and why it is that they've been exploring Greenland and the Arctic, and they have been involved heavily in politics in creating what Kalergi called the Pan-American Union. I've been talking about Kalergi's plans for the Pan-European Union since 2007, and I was a pioneer in that, and I'm going to be a pioneer in exposing the fact that this Pan-American Union, which became NAFTA, and the plans for the North American Union that Trump is now trying to fulfill, were also stated by the Freemason Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi. And I'm going to show you proof of that in his original texts. But long before the Freemason Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, there was the Freemasonic president, Andrew Johnson. In the 1860s, shortly after the Civil War, he bought Alaska, and a man named Robert J. Walker was involved in that. Walker was involved in the banker aspect of all this. He was the Secretary of the Treasury under Polk in 1845 to 1849. And then he got involved with Johnson through a man named Stewart to arrange for the purchase of Alaska. He also wanted to annex Canada, and he wanted to annex and buy Greenland. He also wanted to annex Mexico, and he was involved in the conquest of Texas and making it a territory of the United States. So this whole plan for this North American Union was established by the bankers at least as early as Robert J. Walker, who got his hands on Texas, got his hands on Alaska, and wanted also to take Mexico, Canada, and Greenland, which is the path that Trump is on. So this is by no means new. And again, it goes all the way back to the Bible. It goes back to Kabbalah, the idea that evil stems from the North. They have to conquer the North. This plays a major role in their messianic apocalyptic war plans and the plans to exterminate Europeans, as again I discussed in my video, Kabbalah of Trump's Crazy Quest. So let's start looking at all these Freemasons that were involved in exploring the Arctic, discovering the North Pole, setting up Greenland, setting up the tunnels that were constructed in the ice of Greenland. They built a nuclear reactor in there. Well, let's get into it. So this is from Max Heindel, and he wrote about the Masonic legend has points of variance from as well as agreement with the Bible story. It states that Jehovah created Eve, that the Lucifer spirit, Samael, the devil Satan, united with her, but that he was ousted by Jehovah and forced to leave her before the birth of her son, who was thus the son of a widow, and that's Cain. And Freemasons consider themselves descendants of Lucifer through Cain. Then Jehovah created Adam to be the husband of Eve, and from their union Abel was born, and then Seth. After Cain killed Abel, the soul of Abel went into Seth, and that went into Jacob and the Kabbalists. Thus, from the beginning, there have been two kinds of people in the world. one begotten by the Lucifer spirit, Samael, and partaking of a semi-divine nature imbued with the dynamic martial energy inherited from this divine ancestry of the devil, is aggressive, progressive, and possessed of great initiative, but impatient of restraint or authority, whether human or divine. This is the Freemasons, as opposed to the Kabbalists, who are the priest class. This Freemasonic class is loath to take things on faith and prone to prove all things by the light of reason. These people believe in works rather than faith, and by their dauntless courage and inexhaustible energy, they have transformed the trackless wilderness of the world to a garden full of life and beauty. That's their role in taking over the Arctic. First, it becomes a purgatory where the European Edomites are judged, tortured, and punished as the scapegoats. And the more they're punished, the more they relieve the burden of the Israelites' sins, because that cleanses the sins of the Israelites, so they obtain redemption and can build the world to come and the Garden of Eden. When Kabbalists hear the word Greenland, they think Garden of Eden. When they hear the word Vinland, that Leif Erikson named Canada, they think of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And these are both supposedly in the north of the garden, in the North Pole, in the Arctic regions. So lovely, in fact, that the sons of Cain have forgotten the garden of God, the kingdom of heaven, whence they were expelled by the decree of the lunar god Jehovah, Shekinah, the moon. Against him, they are in constant rebellion because he has tied them by the umbilical cable tow. They have lost their spiritual sight and are imprisoned in the forehead of the body where it is said, Cain was marked. They must wander as prodigal sons in the comparative darkness of the material world. The north is tohu, vavohu, the primordial chaos of the world of Satan. Oblivious to their high and noble estate, until they find the door of the temple. There's supposedly a portal in the North Pole that enters into the underworld of the Garden of Eden, just as there's supposedly a portal in the cave of the patriarchs in Israel that also enters into the temple of the Garden of Eden. And ask and receive light. Then as Freemasons, or children of the light, they are instructed in methods of building a new temple without sound of hammer, and when they have learned this, they may travel in foreign countries to learn more of the craft. So these Freemasons who have been setting us up to take over the Arctic are Satanists, and they believe they are directly descended from Satan, and it is their role, their biblical role, their role in this whole Kabbalah drama, to build the temple and to set up the Arctic first as gulags for Europeans who are going to be enticed in with high-paying jobs. Then they're going to be refused jobs anywhere else. Then they're going to become prisoners in this gulag, as happened with the Bolsheviks in Siberia. We're going to have an American Siberia ultimately. And these Europeans are going to build this Garden of Eden, this subterranean Garden of Eden, for the descendants of Jacob, who will then live in their darkness paradise, in the darkness of Seth Typhon below the surface of the earth, as the geoengineering of those with the Lucifer spirit turn the above ground world into hell. So everything will reverse. The above ground world that we live in today, the present world, Olam Hazeh, will be turned into hell through geoengineering, through fires, through blocking out the sun god Ra. And then the underworld will become heaven, and it will be lit energetically by the black sun, by the radioactive materials within the earth. As they decay, they produce heat and radiation that can be tapped. And they're going to set up a Garden of Eden that they consider a Garden of Eden, subterranean, beneath the earth, as the surface of the earth becomes hell. And we're going to be all tortured as their scapegoats, so they obtain redemption from their God in this process. And then we're going to be completely killed off. And they're going to move underground, and they're going to produce 600,000 androgynous immortal beings, just as they believe that Adam split into his male aspect Adam and his female aspect Eve to produce Abel and Seth. They believe that these 600,000 beings will derive from one person, the Messiah, son of David, just as when the earth was cleansed of sin in the flood, humanity was restored by one person, by Noah and his family. So they're going to kill off all of humanity and then try to cleanse the earth of all of us, to make the surface of the earth hell, and to make a subterranean Garden of Eden, which they will consider paradise, for the 600,000 immortal androgynes that they are going to manufacture out of the skin cells or other aspects of DNA made into eggs and the spermatozoa of the Messiah, son of David. And he will be the singular figure, like Adam and like Noah, to repopulate the world after all the evil is cleansed. And they consider Gentiles to be evil, and especially the Edomites, the Hyperboreans, the Tula people who descend from the Arctic and the north and have the white skin like snow. Those people embody the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They are doing all the work to build this paradise. They are creating all the technology and knowledge needed to pull this off, and will supply the labor to pull all this off. This is one of the primary reasons that Trump and Vladimir Putin are taking over the Arctic. Obama allowed Putin to start taking over the Arctic. Putin has built nuclear power plants on ships and is setting up to take over the Arctic together with Trump. And they are geoengineering the world to create climate change that they believe will thaw the frost and melt the ice of the polar ice caps. And then they can put us up there in their gulags to build for them this paradise, this Garden of Eden. And again, I explain all that much more thoroughly in a couple of my earlier videos. So just as I was the one back in 2007 on the Jeff French show to bring international awareness to the fact that Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi had been sponsored by the bankers Warburg and Rothschild to propagandize for the European Union and to create a master race of Kabbalists while creating an Egyptian-like race of mixed Europeans, Africans, Middle Easterners, and Asians who would supposedly be dumbed down and become the slave race. He, as I'm going to reveal now, was also the one who promoted the Pan-American Union, which was to be a sister organization of the Pan-European Union that became the European Union. So Trump is following the Kalergi plan for America, but it goes back much deeper, as I'm going to show. And they talked about Canada's Anschluss into Pan America, just as I've been saying. The exact words I've been using were expressed by Coudenhove-Kalergi back in the 1920s. So Trump is following the Kalergi plan. The Kalergi plan is not just for Pan-Europa, it is for a Pan-American Union. Pan-Americas. Pan-America, from Alaska to Cape Horn. Peace between Pan-America and Pan-Europa. I hope people comprehend the fact that Kalergi was a prominent Freemason, and he was sponsored to draft all of this, create the architecture for all of this as fulfillment of the designs of the bankers Warburg and Rothschild. And this goes back much, much deeper. And the Freemasons were heavily involved in it, as were the Kabbalists. It is a 2,500-year-old biblical plan. And that's why we're being told about the flat earth, because when you see a map of the flat earth, you see the North Pole in the middle with a portal through it. That middle is the middle of the Garden of Eden, where the two trees were planted in the Garden of Eden. The two trees, as Sefer HaBehir, the precursor to Kabbalah, says, are one tree underneath, but two trees on the surface. And in the Garden of Eden, under the surface that they're going to build, they're going to be one tree. So this is a very prominent figure in our story. This is Robert J. Walker, and he was the Secretary of the Treasury under Polk when they took on Texas and they wanted to take all of Mexico. And then he went on in the Andrew Johnson administration after the Civil War to push for taking over Denmark, Iceland, Canada, and Mexico, and Alaska. And they succeeded in purchasing Alaska. So that brought us up into the Arctic. And they also wanted to take Canada and Greenland. And this was in the 1860s. So this guy was deeply involved with the bankers. He was the Secretary of the Treasury from 1845 to 1849. During the Civil War, he procured massive loans for Europe, for Lincoln, and Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, who was a Freemason. And he was involved with Johnson in this Freemason campaign to annex Alaska, Canada, Greenland, and Iceland and take over the Arctic for the Freemasons. And long prior to that, the Freemasons had been exploring the Arctic. And it's important to note that the Arctic is the 33rd meridian west, as in 33rd degree Mason, and Israel is the 33rd north parallel, the 33rd degree of latitude north that runs all the way through Arizona, New Mexico, and just south of Los Angeles, where we're seeing all these fires. So those latitudes and longitudes play a big role. This is the Treasury warrant for the purchase of Alaska. This book, Freemasonry, A Celebration of the Craft, talks about many of these Freemasons I've been discussing who were involved in the conquest of the Arctic. President Andrew Johnson, 1865 to 1869, after Lincoln was shot in the head. He was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, and he bought Alaska, wanted to annex Canada, Mexico, Iceland, and Greenland, and build this Pan-American Union, as the Freemason Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi called it. That went all the way through to Harry S. Truman, another Freemasonic president of the United States in the 1940s. He wanted to take over Greenland, and he moved America into Greenland under the pretext that it was militarily important during World War II and would be so throughout the Cold War. So I hope you're getting a feel for how deeply the Freemasons have been involved in this quest to capture the Arctic and why it is that they're doing so. This Trump's a very late comer in all of this 2,500-year-old plan, and I hope you realize how dangerous his intentions are. Even though if his intentions were good, it could have certain benefits for the country. But his intentions are not good at all. He wants to enslave us in American Siberia and to have us build their Garden of Eden up there in the north, and they're going to kill all of us off. And they're going to make it impossible for people to find jobs anywhere else. Robert E. Peary was a Freemasonic explorer who discovered the North Pole in 1909. And he had a comrade that I'm going to introduce you to in a little bit in that exploration. And his partner was also a prominent Freemason. And he was a member of the Kane Lodge. And Kane was an Englishman who explored the Arctic, or who explored Greenland and the Arctic very, very early on. So there's this continuous thread of Freemasons being behind all this, and behind them, the bankers, and behind the bankers, the Kabbalists. In the present century, polar exploration has been dominated by members of the craft being Freemasonry. That's an understatement. Richard Peary, who first reached the North Pole in 1909, Sir Ernest Shackleton, the great Antarctic explorer. They also believe there's a smaller portal on the South Pole. Captain Robert Falcon Scott, who lost the race to the South Pole in 1912, but whose expedition inspired the world by the dogged courage and gallantry of its members, and Admiral Richard Byrd and his brother, who flew over both poles in 1926 and 1929, and who dominated Antarctic exploration for 30 years. They planted Freemasonic flags and hats at both poles. The present century polar exploration has been dominated by Freemasons. Richard E. Byrd, pioneer, first to fly over the North Pole with his pilot, Bernd Belchen. He dropped Masonic flags at each pole. This was Peary's partner, Matthew Alexander Henson. I've also seen him just called Alexander Henson. Were Freemasons and highly regarded by their Masonic brethren. In May of 1895, Peary presented a Masonic flag that had been displayed at Independence Bay, Greenland, to Kane Lodge. Again, that Kane is an important figure. Peary received his degrees at Kane Lodge in February and March of 1896. Henson joined Celestial Lodge in New York in 1904, 5 years before his historic voyage to the North Pole. He was African American, and this is the article where you can find much more information about that. So Trump's plan is absolutely nothing new, and it is most clearly put out by Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, the same guy who trapped the Europeans into having the European Union and then opening all their borders to an invasion of people from the Middle East, from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, to create this new race that he foresaw that would be dominated by the master race of the Kabbalists. And speaking of Kabbalists, this is Margaret Cavendish, who in 1666, the year that Shabbatai Zevi declared himself to be the Messiah, the year 5666 on the Anno Lucas calendar. This is a very important year in Kabbalah when the Messiah is supposed to arrive. Described this portal in the North Pole in the first science fiction novel, where a guy went down this portal and discovered a whole new world. She discusses Kabbalah throughout this book. She was very familiar with Kabbalah, and Kabbalah was obviously the inspiration for this work. This was followed up by Ingersoll Rand and his books on Baron Trump, exploring the underworld in very Kabbalistic terms and prophesying Donald Trump and his presidency. So that's some of it. I'm going to get into some web pages to prove even more that this is not something new. This is the fulfillment of 2,500 years of planning. The Freemasons are to be the Shabbos Goyim, to help bring all this about, to do all the labor and the work that Esau does in order to construct the Garden of Eden for Jacob up in the North Pole, which is both purgatory and the Garden of Eden, and the place in the garden where the tree of knowledge of good and evil was planted by Samael, the devil. It supposedly contains a portal into the underworld, which will become their Garden of Eden. So here's the Wikipedia page on Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi. There he is. He was of mixed race. He was sponsored by Warburg and Warburg and Rothschild to do all this. He set up pan-European activism, but he also set up pan-American activism, which is what we're being hit with now, and which will be even more disastrous for indigenous American peoples if Trump succeeds in fulfilling the Kalergi plan for a pan-American union. This is a very good article on the remarkable Freemasons who were Arctic explorers. Alicia Kent Kane, this is the Kane I was talking about. In 1853, physician Alicia Kent Kane, a medical officer in the United States Navy, led the second Grinnell expedition from London, England to Rensselaer Harbor, Greenland. Kane, an experienced Arctic explorer and member of the first Grinnell expedition in 1850, chartered the coasts of Smith Sound and Kane Basin in Greenland. American merchant Henry Grinnell financed both tours, launched as search expeditions for the 1845 lost Franklin Polar Expedition. While most well known for his voyages of the Arctic, Kane was also a member of several medical societies, etc., etc. Masonic degrees in Franklin Lodge. His father had been a master of the lodge. A Kane Lodge was chartered and dedicated to Kane, who died in Havana, Cuba in 1857. Here's Peary, who discovered the North Pole. His partner, Alexander Henson. So that's a good article to look into if you're interested in this. Kane's doctor, Alicia Kent, American scientist and explorer born in Philadelphia and famous on account of 2 voyages to the Arctic regions in search of Sir John Franklin, an English Freemason. So Franklin was also a Freemason and explorer. Kane was an enthusiastic Freemason, a member of the Franklin Lodge. Brother Kane reached Newfoundland on his way north. In search of Brother Franklin, he was entertained and presented Masonic flag, etc. It's just Freemason after Freemason after Freemason. This is the 33rd meridian west. You can see that it cuts, it's the 33rd degree of longitude west, cuts straight through Greenland and very little else from the North Pole to the South Pole. This is the 33rd parallel north that cuts through Israel, cuts through prominent areas of China, the behemoth, cuts through New Mexico and Arizona and Southern California, where we see all kinds of goings on. And I think there's something to that. This was Project Iceworm, like the Tula Gesellschaft, these Tula people and the Hyperboreans of the north, this race of warriors, white-skinned, associated with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the northern part of the Garden of Eden. Project Iceworm was a top-secret United States Army program of the Cold War, which aimed to build a network of nuclear missile launch sites under the Greenland ice sheet. And it's interesting that they're tunneling under it because their ultimate goal is to live underground in a subterranean Garden of Eden, a paradise underground, as they make the surface of the earth above the earth hell for us. So everything's going to invert. Hell is going to become on the surface, and paradise is going to be subterranean. They will live in paradise, and we will be punished and exterminated in hell above. This is Camp Century, which was part of Project Iceworm. And there is also Pituffik Space Base, which is in Greenland, in which the United States is involved. It was powered by a nuclear reactor, and that could have environmental implications. Hazardous waste remains buried under the ice. So again, this is becoming subterranean. That's his book. So I just want everyone to understand for the 100th time, what Trump is up to is fulfilling the apocalyptic, messianic, cultish aspirations of Chabad Lubavitch and Messianic Judaism that have been planned out for 2,500 years. In my other videos, I show the biblical passages related to all this, the Kabbalistic passages related to this, the Talmudic passages. I've covered how flat earth fits into this in numerous videos in the past. We are being duped and we are being led into our own ultimate destruction. Ultimately, Freemasons serve as the Shabbos Goyim. They serve as the Noahides, and by extension, they're going to try to force all people of European descent into these Siberian gulags, initially probably with good wages, and then you won't be able to find a job anywhere else. And they're setting us up, and this setup has been understood by them all along, and it is not coincidental that it was Andrew Johnson, the Freemason, who was involved in buying Alaska and wanted to take Canada, Greenland, and Iceland. It is not coincidental that Truman, the Freemason, who helped found Israel, was involved in all this. And it's not coincidental that Donald Trump, who was put into power by Chabad Lubavitch and Miriam Adelson and was friends with Jeffrey Epstein and is the biggest Zionist in all of history, is the Messiah, son of Joseph of the Gentile side, is trying to fulfill this ancient quest to take over the Arctic at the exact same time that his Chabad partner, Vladimir Putin, is moving on the Arctic and has ships with nuclear power plants to serve as power stations in the conquest of the Arctic. And it's not coincidental that they are trying to force climate change through geoengineering to make all of this feasible. And it's not coincidental that they are bringing in people from India and all over the world to replace Europeans in America and in Europe and in Australia and in Canada, so that we all get pushed up into these gulags further and further north to be the Tula people, to be the Hyperborean slaves, and ultimately to cease to exist, to be blotted out completely as if we had never existed. And this is all part of the quest to have the behemoth defeat the Leviathan and then have a mutually consuming war between the two and leave only alive these Kabbalists in their paradise. And they're probably going to try to create some kind of networks between Israel, the garden in the east, and the garden in the north, in the Arctic, on the North Pole, in Greenland, up all the way up to the North Pole. This has been their plan all along. That's why Freemasons who are Kabbalists themselves, have been the ones who have been the ones on the ground achieving all of the architecture for all of this. That's why the bankers have always been behind it. And that's why Kalergi pushed for it, Truman pushed for it, Andrew Johnson pushed for it, and that's why Trump is pushing for it. And this is Kalergi Plan Part 2. They have the European Union. It's been a disaster. It did exactly what it was proposed to accomplish. It made the Kabbalists the master race over Europe, and it is destroying the indigenous Europeans and replacing them with a new mixed race that Kalergi expected to be a slave race. So we should not let this happen to us in America. We should recognize that Trump is part of this ancient agenda to exterminate us. I want to thank all of my contributors who have made this presentation possible. I'm going to be talking more about the North and how it relates to Leviathan and Behemoth. So please stay tuned for that. Like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to contribute, you can do so at my website, CJB Books, where you can also find my books on these subjects. Beware the World to Come has a lot of information about all this, especially about this dual seed line of Esau and Jacob and the Kabbalistic meanings behind it. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.